In the spring of 2025, a 72-year-old man walked the fence line of a 21-acre cattle farm in Cranbury, New Jersey, the way other men check the locks on their doors, every single morning, without explaining why. His name was Andy Henry, and every day, before the sun cleared the warehouse rooftops to the east, he was out there, past the old gate, along the north pasture, where 40 head of beef cattle grazed on grass that smelled nothing like the diesel surrounding it, down the west side, where chain link separated his land from a loading dock, back up to the mailbox at the road, 21 acres. That was all, surrounded on every side by warehouses, distribution centers, and the low rumble of trucks on the New Jersey Turnpike, 600 feet away. The warehouse managers saw him. The truck drivers pulling out of exit 8A saw him. They all knew the number. $25 million. That was what developers had offered. Not once, not twice, but for decades. And for decades, Andy Henry had said the same word. No. He never explained. Not to the developers who kept coming back. Not to the men who shook their heads and said, gently, "The way you talk to someone you believe is making a mistake. Andy, at your age, that kind of money is a different life." He just walked the fence. One morning in late April, he reached the mailbox and found a letter inside. White envelope, official seal. He opened it standing on the gravel, with a steer named Lucky calling from the barn behind him. He read it twice. Then he folded the letter, put it in his shirt pocket, and walked back to finish his chores. He did not tell his brother that morning. He did not call anyone. Nobody on South River Road knew what was in that letter. They were about to find out. If stories of quiet determination, family legacy, and the kind of stubbornness that outlasts everything mean something to you, subscribe and join us every week. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We read every one, and you'd be surprised how far these stories travel. The land had been in the family since before anyone on South River Road could remember. In 1850, a man named Joseph McGill, Andy's great-grandfather on his mother's side, purchased 21 acres of farmland in Cranbury Township, tucked almost dead center between New York City and Philadelphia. The soil was dark and level. The air in summer carried the smell of warm grass and manure, and the faint sweetness of hay drying in the barn. It was good land then. It stayed good land for a long time. 5 generations worked it. They survived a house fire. They survived the Great Depression. Andy's parents both served in World War II. His mother's name is still etched into the war memorial in the center of town. When they came home, they did not talk much about what they had seen. They simply went back to the fence line and kept farming. That was how they taught their sons what mattered. Andy and his brother Christopher grew up between those fences. Christopher was the quieter of the two. Steady, careful, the kind of man who fixed things before they broke. Andy was the one who walked. He walked the rows. He walked the pasture edges. He noticed when a post leaned 2 degrees more than it had the week before. He noticed when Lucky, the steer who had earned his name by surviving a difficult birth, shifted his grazing pattern toward the east side of the field. He kept no notebook, but he carried the farm in his head the way some men carry maps. Andy left for 20 years. He joined the United States Air Force and served 2 decades. But he came back. He always knew he would come back. In 2012, he and Christopher fully inherited the property. They put $200,000 into repairs, new fencing, barn maintenance, the work that keeps a place standing when everything around it is falling. And everything around it was falling. Or rather, everything around it was being sold. In 1952, the New Jersey Turnpike was laid down close enough to hear from the back pasture. In 1972, exit 8A was constructed just minutes from the farm, and the floodgates opened. The first warehouse went up on what used to be the Patterson place. Then the Dudley farm became a distribution center. One by one, domino style, the surrounding farms disappeared under concrete and metal. Land values climbed. Buyout offers arrived in the mail, polite at first, then persistent. 20 million, 25, 30. The Henry brothers watched their neighbors sell, watched the trucks multiply, watched the skyline change from tree lines to rooftops. They stayed. The 21 acres of green pasture, visible from above like a small island in a gray sea, remained exactly what it had been since 1850. Andy never said why in any way that satisfied the people asking. He just kept walking the fence. He kept feeding the cattle. He kept saying no with the same flat, unhurried tone he had used the first time. That was the spring. Andy Henry began to understand that saying no might not be enough anymore. Andy's father never gave speeches. He was not a man who explained himself, and he did not expect his sons to ask. But there was one evening, Andy must have been 15 or 16, when a developer came to the door for the first time. His father listened, said no, and closed the door. At dinner that night, the old man set down his fork and said something Andy would carry for the rest of his life. You don't sell what people died to come home to. That was all. He picked up his fork and finished eating. Andy's mother, whose name sits on the town war memorial to this day, said nothing. She did not need to. The lesson had been delivered the way all important lessons were delivered in that house, once, quietly, and without repetition. 20 years in the Air Force taught Andy the rest, not about farming, about discipline, about how to hold a position when the pressure builds. You do not react when provoked. You do not make decisions when angry. You prepare your ground. You study the terrain. And when the time comes, you do not move. The military had a word for it. They called it holding the line. When the letter arrived in April 2025, Andy understood what it meant before he finished reading. Eminent domain, the government's power to take private property for what it defines as public use, as long as it provides what the law calls just compensation. In 2005, the Supreme Court ruled in a case called Kello versus City of New London that local authorities could seize private land and hand it to private developers if they believed the project served a broader public purpose. Tax revenue counted. Job creation counted. The ruling remains one of the most controversial property rights decisions in American legal history. Many states passed laws to limit it afterward. New Jersey did not. Andy folded the letter and drove to find a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. A man named Timothy Duggan, who specialized in exactly this, fighting eminent domain. Word got around South River Road quickly. The warehouse managers heard. The neighbors who had sold their own farms years ago heard. And the comments came, not unkindly, but with the weight of people who believed they were being practical. Andy, you're 72 years old. You're fighting the township with their own tax money. What do you have? The law is on their side. The precedent is on their side. You're one man, with 21 acres. Take whatever they offer. Half of something is better than all of nothing. They were not wrong exactly. By every reasonable measure, the math was against him. One retired veteran, 21 acres. Against a township with attorneys, ordinances, and a statewide court order requiring 146,000 affordable housing units by 2035. Andy listened to all of it. He nodded politely. Then he and Duggan filed the first lawsuit in July. The first lawsuit challenged the township's ordinance allowing seizure by eminent domain. Duggan built the filing carefully, line by line, argument by argument. Andy reviewed every page at the kitchen table where his father had once set down his fork and ended a conversation with a single sentence. They filed in July. They waited. In May, before the filing was ready, The Cranbury Township Committee held a vote. Every member voted yes, unanimous. The seizure would proceed. Andy stood before the committee that evening. Christopher spoke too, asking them to consider what 175 years meant, not in dollars, but in continuity. The committee listened politely. The vote did not change. That was the first failure. The law was doing exactly what the law was designed to do. Eminent domain does not require the property owner's consent. It requires only a government body willing to invoke it, and a definition of public use broad enough to apply. Cranbury had both. Andy drove home that night on roads he had known since childhood, past warehouse lots that used to be pastures, past loading docks built on soil his neighbors had once planted. He parked the truck. He walked the fence in the dark. Lucky shifted in the barn but did not call out. The next morning, he filed the second lawsuit. This one, challenging the affordable housing plan itself. Then came the second blow. In August, the township offered what they called a compromise. They would not take all 21 acres. They would take half, 11.5 acres for the apartment complex. Andy could keep 9 acres and the farmhouse. 9 acres. People told him to take it. Not unkindly, with genuine concern. Andy, 9 acres and a house is still a home. It's better than a courtroom. You've made your point. Everybody heard you. But this is the government. You know how this ends. Your parents would understand. Sometimes you save what you can. 9 acres was not a cattle operation. 9 acres was a yard with a memory. Andy knew this, the way he knew the fence line. Not because someone explained it, but because he had walked it enough times to know exactly where it began and where it ended. 40 head of cattle cannot graze on 9 acres. A farm that has operated since 1850 cannot be halved and called whole. He said no. Duggan prepared motions. Andy started doing something he had never done before. He began making calls to reporters, to agricultural organizations, to anyone who would listen. Christopher helped. They were not loud men. They were not men who sought cameras. But they had spent 20 years in the Air Force and a lifetime on a farm, and both institutions teach the same thing. When your position is right, you hold it, and you make sure people know where you stand. A GoFundMe page went up. Letters of support arrived, first from Cranbury, then from across New Jersey, then from states Andy had never visited. Someone shared the story on social media, then someone else. The posts multiplied in the way things multiply when people recognize something true. By late summer, the story had reached beyond South River Road, beyond Middlesex County, beyond New Jersey. Andy did not know it yet, but someone in Washington was reading about a 21-acre farm that refused to disappear. That summer, across the state and beyond it, the losses mounted. In Cumberland County, Pennsylvania, data center developers walked up farm lanes and knocked on doors, offering $60,000 an acre for land that families had worked for generations. Some said yes. Some had no choice. Prime farmland, flat, open, closed to power corridors, disappeared under concrete foundations, designed to house servers, not cattle. One preservation officer described the math plainly. Conservation trusts could offer maybe 20% of what a developer would pay. For a farmer carrying debt, or aging out of the work, or simply tired, the choice was not really a choice at all. In Pennsylvania and Virginia, and across the mid-Atlantic, the pattern repeated. A farm sold, a warehouse went up, another farm sold, another distribution center. The dominoes fell in the same direction they had been falling for decades, only faster now, driven by demand for AI infrastructure and e-commerce logistics that required exactly the kind of land farmers had spent lifetimes maintaining. Level, accessible, and close to highways. Jeff Swinehart, who ran the Lancaster Farmland Trust, put it simply. Farms are getting picked off one by one, he said. Society views agricultural land as not in its highest and best use, that it is idle land waiting for some better use. Idle land. The phrase hung in the air, like something that needed correcting, but had no one willing to correct it. Other farmers who fought eminent domain had lost. The legal precedent was clear. Kello stood. The government's definition of public use stretched wide enough to include nearly anything a township committee decided it included. A farmer's attachment to the land, no matter how many generations deep, was not a legal argument. It was a sentiment. Courts do not rule on sentiment. And in Cranbury, the clock was running. The township had a statewide court order demanding 265 affordable housing units within a decade. They had identified Andy Henry's 21 acres as the site. They had voted unanimously. They had offered a compromise. They had been refused. Andy Henry was one man, 72 years old, no political connections, no corporate legal team, a GoFundMe page, and a bulldog attorney, and a fence line he walked every morning while the trucks rumbled past on the Turnpike. Every reasonable measure said this was over. But on June 17th, a woman in Washington, D.C., opened her laptop and read about a 21-acre cattle farm that was the last working farm on its road. She read about a man who had turned down $25 million. She read about a letter in a mailbox. Her name was Brooke Rollins. She was the United States Secretary of Agriculture. She posted 5 words that changed everything. I am looking into this. What followed did not happen quickly. It did not happen with fanfare. It happened the way things happen when serious people decide to act, through phone calls, meetings, and the slow machinery of institutions correcting themselves. Secretary Rollins did not simply post and move on. She called. She investigated. On September 24th, Andy Henry sat in a room in Washington, D.C., across a table from the Secretary of Agriculture, the Chief of the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and the New Jersey Secretary of Agriculture. They did not talk about 21 acres. They talked about thousands of farms, across every state, facing the same threat. Andy's fence line had become a front line. Back in Cranbury, the township said nothing. No public statement. No press conference. The committee that had voted unanimously to take the farm went quiet in the way that institutions go quiet when the ground shifts beneath them. On October 24th, Rollins posted the announcement. The Henry farm had been saved. A change in the New Jersey Housing and Mortgage Finance Agency rules made other land in Cranbury available for development. The township would look elsewhere. The agreement would protect the farm permanently. Governor Murphy, a man on the opposite end of the political spectrum from the secretary, issued his own statement. New Jersey will always protect its farmers and farmland. No ceremony, no ribbon cutting, no stage, just a rule change, a statement, and a farm that remained exactly what it had been the morning before. The committee members who had voted to seize the property did not call Andy Henry. They did not write a letter. They did not walk up his driveway the way the developers had done for decades. The silence from Cranbury Township was complete. Not the silence of shame exactly, but something close to it. The silence of people who had been so certain of their authority that they had not considered the possibility of being wrong. A reporter asked Andy what he wanted people to take from the story. I just hope this helps other farmers, he said. That was all. No victory speech, no bitterness. Just a man in a shirt pocket where a folded letter had once sat, standing on ground that 5 generations had refused to sell and 1 generation had refused to surrender. Lucky called from the barn. Andy walked back to finish his evening chores. The fence was where it had always been. The posts were upright. The wire was tight. The letter was gone. The farm was not. In February of 2026, the United States Department of Agriculture launched something called the Farmer and Rancher Freedom Framework, a nationwide initiative to protect family farms from the kind of legal pressure Andy Henry had faced. They cited the Henry Farm as the first case study, not a policy paper, not a hypothetical. A real 21-acre cattle operation on South River Road in Cranbury, New Jersey. No announcement came from Andy, no press tour. The idea spread the way practical things always spread among people who work the land, quietly, through need and recognition. Other farm families reached out to attorneys. Conservation trusts saw an increase in inquiries. Legislators in states that had never passed eminent domain protections began conversations they had avoided for years. Nobody organized a movement. The movement organized itself, the way it always does when one person stands long enough for others to find their footing. Wendell Berry once wrote, "The care of the earth is our most ancient and most worthy, and after all, our most pleasing responsibility." Andy Henry would probably not call what he did care of the earth. He would call it walking the fence, but the result is the same. Something that was here before him will be here after, because one person decided it was not for sale. There are things the world prices in dollars, and there are things a man prices in generations. $25 million is a number. 175 years is a promise, and a promise, once kept, teaches the people watching that keeping theirs is still possible. Every farm around him vanished. Andy Henry's never will. What stayed with you from Andy's story? Drop it in the comments. We read every one. Tell us where you're watching from. This community reaches further than you think. And if stories like this one matter to you, subscribe. We'll be back next week with another.